In this video, we're going to go over the main acceleration work that I did. Within the context of where we're at in the season, the objective we're trying to hit now is technique refinement. For acceleration, that means eliminating the space between my knees as one foot makes contact with the ground. You'll see how we come to make this a clear point to work on during the warm-up, given my athletic history and current ability. We'll start with the concept of early season acceleration work.
The thing about the standing accelerations is it's like the prerequisite to anything that we do on the ground, anything we do on the block. My best advice would be to fight the urge to try and get a really aggressive angle forward, because if we wanted to get that aggressive angle, we would put you in a 3-point so that you could just shoot out like that. Just do your best to keep that in mind whenever you're like in these standing acceleration sessions, which won't be long. What I'm looking for is a conservative angle of the torso so that you can easily show me low heel recovery and being able to stomp down and back into the track. A lot of people just try and stay hunched over, like hinged at the hip, and they've got their torso pointing straight down the track, all their legs pointing up, everything's going a different way. They are just surprised when nothing comes to them very easy.
Now looking at rep 1.
We see a good projection right here. Everything's through in a straight line. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit hard in training flats, but our first main checkpoint right here is eliminating like any space we can between these two knees right here. I'm thinking that once we get to a position like this, if we can think about changing the axis like right here, and pushing down back underneath the hip, that it's going to draw these two knees closer together at that impact point.
Yeah, it's like I'm waiting for that knee to come through before I can start pushing back.
Exactly. You see just this step get maybe a little bit of ahead of the hips right here too. It's getting close. Like the feeling is right. Like you're striking down. The point underneath our hip is just a little bit further back. Once we get some momentum going, all we're going to have to do from there is just strike down instead of down and back. And once we have blocks and things we can push off of to get momentum in the first like millisecond of the race, then it's a little bit less down and back. For now, at least in these training reps and flats and everything like that, the further that we can bring it back underneath the hips, because you'll see there's just a frame that we just kind of have to go bam, bam, until we get to this position.
Yeah, I felt that switching kind of action. That's another cue that I've heard before, where you kind of switch on the contact. It was better as the reps went on.
Absolutely. For a lot of people, that actually kind of confuses them, because what some people say is like a broomstick's kind of in the middle and you're trying to hit it from both sides to kind of snap it in the middle instead of it just kind of rotating around there. But this is what we're looking for right here.
We'll see how rep 2 is any different.
Actually, to make it happen, there might be a frame or two more that you're holding position in the air right there. So we get to like right here, and you'll see we're fully extended actually at this step, but we're going 1, 2, 3, and then you really start to get that feeling of like, okay, let me get it back underneath the hip. This rep right here to this rep right here, where from the first movement we're more available. Do you think maybe there was something left in the warm-up to get you to that optimal performance capacity?
I don't think so. I think it was more of the cueing side of things. I didn't have the idea of, oh, I need to switch here.
Okay. I would say that it was such a drastic difference that I would find a way that we can incorporate that into the warm-up.
So up to this point in time, my idea of what a good warm-up is didn't include that I could be working on these technical things so that I hit them well in the main work. Pay close attention to how Coach E leads me to understand that my initial thought of what's wrong has a different solution, which is integrate the right movement patterns into the warm-up. With rep 3, you can continue to see my ability to execute this objective of switching, so to speak, improve, but it needs to happen earlier in the workout.
That's the type of control that we're looking for exactly. Boom, nice, right there. That's great right there. Now, if we feel like we can then switch right after that, it's going to take however our body was tricked into making that motion right there, because you can see here that we start to go down, but it's going to take like a very intense movement for it to really return right underneath the hip. Third step, could have been a little bit more patient holding there right there, because it lands out in front of us, which is where we see that shoulder dip.
And what do you mean by being patient?
I appreciate you asking that. You can see right here where, and honestly, I really don't like using the word patient in track and field because it kind of gives the idea of like passiveness in an otherwise absolutely intense activity. But maybe like finishing the movement a little bit. You can see here that we're coming off this back foot right here, and maybe there's just a millisecond longer that we could kind of hold this knee projection, or at least maybe there's a little bit of hip flexion that we can eke out of there to get us a little bit more space, maybe, to drive into the ground. And if you need an idea of what that looks like, just refer back to the first step in this rep right here, where it's coming through. And you see it projects a couple frames.
Yeah, it's like I have a little bit more vertical.
Yeah, like we're not falling as much, like is what it is. When you get to this bent position right here, and why I encourage people not to be bent so forward is because this guy has no momentum and he's falling forward. Usually second, third step kind of makes up for that loss of balance by reaching out in front just to catch it a little bit?
That's something that I would say I do, is fall a little bit more than I feel like I'm pushing vertically.
So you feel as though it's kind of crashing down by the time you get to steps 3 and 4?
Yes.
Okay.
On to rep 4, I'm in the weeds with the idea that it's the cue, but Evan has seen it a million times and can frame it in a way that we can take action by changing the warm-up.
Let's take a look into this one and specifically watch 3 and 4 right here. Great step right there. It's a very good second step right there. It draws them really close together. Let's get into the third one. That's actually an improvement with the third step right there too. So now let's keep going. Answer me this. As we come out of the blocks, right there, you hit that point with the fourth one where you just feel like that's kind of the capacity to keep moving like that or anything?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the capacity so much as I don't have the right cues.
Okay, like by the time you get to that point, it maybe feels like a completely different part of the race.
Yeah, beyond the third step, it's like I don't know how to transition into top speed.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because maybe you're expecting it to feel like exactly like these first 3 steps right here. But really, that's where we start to break up the first portion of the race into the block start and acceleration. The block start is only the first 2 steps, just that swipe, swipe, let me come out. And then from there, gradually, I'm trying to keep driving forward with the understanding that it's going to get more vertical with each step as it goes on. Now, as we place those steps a little bit more aggressively, with the idea that we are rising up, we'll be able to extend that acceleration phase further and further and maybe be able to keep these first 3 steps and get 4 or 5 out of them eventually. I'm trying to see like if you kind of dipped your torso down a little bit. I call it kind of like trying to hold it too long. Like if your body felt like it naturally needed to rise up and you kind of prevented it, resulting in obviously a feeling of falling forward and you having to catch yourself like that. It is very consistent though. We see it like on all reps. We've established that maybe you haven't really developed a plan in how we transition from that point, but does it feel like, bam, there's a moment where I'm falling forward?
Yeah, it's like a moment where I'm falling forward and then my foot is no longer under my hips right away. It's like I have to take a big step to catch myself. Thinking about every little cue while you're running isn't the point of this discussion. Really what this is doing is setting up a plan so that you can best correct what you're doing wrong.
So 2 routes here. We relieve a little bit of tension with the torso and take a little bit easier reps with the torso angle. Or if you find the capacity to continue to make steps like this, bam, and if you can stay right there and just maintain that for a couple more steps, it's going to be really fast. Because like you're right on the cusp of that balance right there, where if we can continue to extend out the front and like get the hip flexion.
And by hip flexion, it's just getting those knees up.
Getting those knees up, but then also finding a way that we can like plant it right back underneath us, because you're in position to keep doing it, to be honest. I don't think that this is too far forward. I've seen some people literally try and go parallel. If we keep lifting right here and then put it right back underneath us, I'm just trying to decipher whether it's like a reaction, whether you're in the middle of the run and your brain says, hey man, you're about to fall on your face if you don't stick your foot out there. Or if you're hitting a point where it's just so high torque that, you know, that's how far ballistically we can just open up the hips rapidly and we need to develop a capacity for it.
I trained for most of my time on a cinder track. That's like a pretty slippery surface. So as I would get up to speed, I don't know if that affected my movement patterns in a way that I'm apprehensive. Like I feel like I'm going to slip if I don't have spikes on.
That could be a possibility, honestly. It could be something that you've just grown accustomed to and you might just be doing without even really realizing it, because it doesn't look like you're out of capacity like at this angle. Like that you just can't really continue to make those movements, because it even gets maybe a little bit further forward in a step that kind of comes abrupt, and then you do this acrobatic stuff. So I know it's still possible, and I see steps after that do exactly that same thing, you know? You show evidence of being so dialed in with the movement in earlier steps that I would say that even if you were fatigued, that it would still kind of operate in a way that resembles later steps even. That one's just so different. In my mind, it gravitates to something very particular with like an instance like you're talking about. Like, oh yeah, this is, looking back, the first thing that goes to my mind is just a slippery track and how maybe I could hit 1, 2, 3 steps, but then after that, I would have to settle in.
Looking at the very last rep now.
This is where things get interesting, because where's this guy been? Really good first step. Almost like a cheeky second step, because look how far you project right here, and then watch it rip back underneath you, at least in a much more of a capacity than we saw in any of the reps beforehand. Almost to the point where I think when it gets to the ground, we're not too far off. So look at them snapping together right there. And then we go to the next one, does the same thing. We go to the next one, same thing. and we extend it, and we're transitioning just fine. This was a really good rep, and it looked night and day difference from the two of them. So I ask you again, is there anything that we could have warmed up better for?
Yeah, I think so.
That's like the hard part for a lot of people, is because I've had a couple people this season come and visit me, come to the like Pure Athletics open practice, and we're sitting there and they're warming up for like 45 minutes, and I think they just get taken aback at how like long that process is. And honestly, I treat it like a rocket preparation, just because like once this workout starts, I'm either ready to go and I get all of those training reps, or I'm warming up into it, and we see when I get going, we see something really, really good when you get going, but we also see odd things. You know, a lot of our conversation was considering maybe stability seeking, maybe imbalance or something like that. In reality, it was just continuing to warm up. Honestly, if I think about it, in that piriformis area where it would kind of control the tilt laterally of the hip, every little workout's a little investigation, you know?
Yeah.
Figuring out how it played out.
This video explains an Olympic level process.
This is like the nature of like the anaerobically intense ballistic activities. Like, we're only limited by how available you are, you know what I mean? So every day Noah Lyles is coming out to the track and just remixing this warm-up thing that has, it's been changed like 50 ways, but it's just kind of that new thing that even mentally says they're not ready for the next one. They're not ready for, you know, the elastic kickbacks that we've done 9 different ways. But in his mind, it's like, you know, I'm redeveloping the process. It's getting just that much better, even if it's just psychologically, like I'm just that much more prepared for efforts and everything.
So it's like how you train your guys with Pure Athletics. You're always remixing the warm-up to get them more dialed in for their main work? Or what do you mean by that?
As in, if there's any question or any doubt when you have in a warm-up, if there was anything else you could have done, then we're not warmed up as much as we could. If that means a couple more reps before you start the actual warm-up to get those reps in, those are called build-ups. You'll see them at the end of the shakeout there, but we don't consider that warm-up just yet. Or we can label it warm-up, but then once we get to the last one, I'm hoping that the first one, at least when the reps start, look as good as the last one. Mm-hmm. Because that's how we start to see what your limits are versus how much can we kind of potentiate you into a good result that truthfully isn't the best result. Because even at the absolute fast times that we'll get in this process, we'll still only be able to see the absolute best you can do in reps like 2 and 3 and stuff like that, if that makes sense.